The boy's days began and ended on the streets. He had no roof to call his own, no bed waiting for him, only the rough pavement and the cold air of the city. Every morning he woke up stiff and tired, curled in corners where the wind cut less, or under bridges where the noise of cars became his lullaby. Hunger was his closest companion, gnawing at him from the moment he opened his eyes until he finally closed them again at night. People passed him every day, eyes sliding over him as if he were invisible. Some turned away on purpose, unwilling to face the sight of a boy so young with nowhere to go. Others tossed quick glances, pity flickering for a second before their lives carried them forward. To them, he was just another shadow on the sidewalk, a figure holding an old backpack, wearing the same worn-out hoodie and sneakers day after day. But behind the tired eyes and thin frame, there was a sharpness, a quiet awareness. Life on the streets had taught him to watch closely, to notice things most people ignored. He could tell which alleyways were safe and which weren't just by the way the air felt. He could spot trouble before it reached him, and he had learned the rhythm of the city, the rush of people during the day, the danger that crept in at night. Still, he was only a teenager. There were moments when the weight of it all was too heavy, when his chest tightened and he wished anyone would stop and ask if he was all right. Sometimes at night, he stared up at the stars hidden by the glow of streetlights and wondered if he was meant to be forgotten. Food was always the hardest. He searched trash bins near restaurants hoping for something edible. Some days he was lucky enough to find a half-eaten sandwich, other days only scraps too spoiled to touch. A kind stranger would sometimes hand him a granola bar or $1, and he would hold on to it like treasure. He knew how to stretch the smallest gift into survival for another day. He was used to the cold, to the ache in his bones, but he had never gotten used to the feeling of being unseen. When families walked past him, holding hands and laughing, his chest would ache with longing. When kids his age hurried home with school bags and stories of their day, he wondered what it felt like to belong somewhere, to be expected, to be wanted. Yet even in his struggle he had something many missed: courage. It lived quietly in him, hidden under layers of hardship. He had seen fights break out in alleys, had run from danger more than once, had helped another homeless man once when he collapsed on the sidewalk. Despite his pain, there was a goodness in him that had not been crushed. That night, as the city lights flickered on one by one, he wandered toward a busy street corner. The air was cold enough to sting his skin, and his stomach growled from lack of food, but his eyes were alert, scanning the sidewalks, the cars, the people. For him, paying attention wasn't a choice, it was survival. He noticed the details others missed: a car parked too long, footsteps echoing from behind, the nervous glances of strangers. He didn't know it yet, but this sharpness, this ability to see what others ignored, would become the reason he was in the right place at the right time. His life had taught him silence, invisibility, and resilience. But soon, that same life would push him into a moment where his courage would be louder than anything else. For now, he remained a shadow on the street, moving quietly, his old backpack slung over his shoulders. The world did not see him. But the city had a way of revealing truths in unexpected ways, and soon, everyone would know the boy they had once ignored. The night had fallen heavy on the city. Streetlights flickered to life one by one, stretching long shadows across cracked sidewalks. The boy pulled his thin hoodie tighter around his chest, trying to hold back the cold that seemed to seep straight into his bones. Nights were always the hardest. No noise to distract him, no crowds to blend into, only silence broken by the occasional siren or the growl of an engine speeding past. He walked with no real destination, his old backpack hanging loosely on his shoulder. Inside it were the only things he owned: a worn-out blanket, a half-empty bottle of water, and a few pieces of stale bread he had managed to save. Every step echoed louder in the emptiness of the street, and with each step came the same question that haunted him every night: where will I sleep? Sometimes, when he was lucky, he found a spot behind the dumpsters of a closed restaurant, where the smell of food lingered in the air and stray cats curled up near him. Other nights, he slept in the subway station until security pushed him out. Tonight, however, even those places felt unsafe. The air was different. Something about it made him uneasy, as if the shadows were thicker than usual. He stopped at a corner where the neon sign of a convenience store buzzed weakly above the glass doors. He leaned against the wall, watching people come and go. Most didn't look at him at all. A few glanced, then quickly turned away. He had gotten used to it, but the sting never really left. He wanted to be seen, not as a problem, not as a stranger, but as a human being. As he stood there, he noticed the police car roll slowly down the street. Its headlights swept across the pavement, casting sharp glows on the dark corners. Inside, a female officer sat behind the wheel, her uniform crisp, her face calm but alert. She was younger than most cops he had seen, maybe in her late 20s, her hair tied back neatly under her cap. She drove with a carefulness that told him she hadn't been on the job long, but her posture showed determination. She slowed near the store, her eyes scanning the area. It was routine, just another patrol on just another night. But to the boy it was more than that. He had seen her before, driving through the same streets, her car crawling through neighborhoods where others didn't bother to look. Unlike most officers, she sometimes made eye contact, her gaze soft, almost kind. She had never spoken to him, but he noticed the difference. She didn't look at him like he was trouble. She looked at him like she knew he existed. Still, the boy stayed in the shadows, leaning back against the wall. His rule was simple: stay invisible. If no one noticed him, no one could hurt him. But as he watched her car disappear slowly around the corner, a strange feeling settled in his chest. Something about the night didn't feel right. He pushed himself off the wall and started walking again, his steps quieter now. The wind carried faint noises, a low laugh, the shuffle of feet, the sound of bottles clinking together. He followed the sound with his eyes and saw movement in a narrow alley nearby. A group of men lingered there, half hidden in the shadows. Their posture wasn't casual. They weren't just hanging around. They were watching. The boy's heart quickened. He had lived long enough on the streets to know the difference between harmless loitering and something darker. These men had their eyes fixed down the road, the same road where the police car had gone. Their whispers carried a sharpness, their glances alert. He couldn't hear all the words, but the tone was enough. For a moment the boy froze. His mind argued with itself. Walk away. This is not your problem. Stay out of it. You've survived this long by staying quiet. That was the voice of survival, the one that had kept him alive through so many uncertain nights. But another voice pushed back, softer yet stronger. Look closely. Something bad is about to happen. And you're the only one who sees it. He tightened his grip on his backpack strap, his body tense. He knew he was just a homeless kid, invisible to the world. No one would believe him if he spoke. No one would care if he pointed and shouted. But still, he could not shake the unease spreading in his chest. The men in the alley were waiting for something. And the police car had gone exactly in their direction. The night grew heavier, colder. The boy's breath came out in white puffs as he stood at the corner, staring at the shadows. He didn't know what to do yet, but he knew one thing for certain. Tonight would not be an ordinary night. The female officer drove slowly through the streets, her patrol car humming softly against the quiet of the night. Her name was Officer Elena, though most people in the neighborhood simply thought of her as the new cop. She was still fresh on the force, her badge not yet a year old. She had trained hard, passed the exams, and told herself she was ready for anything. But no amount of training could prepare her for the unpredictable rhythm of the streets at night. Her eyes moved constantly, left to right to left, scanning for movement, for danger, for anything out of place. The radio on her dashboard murmured with static and occasional chatter, but otherwise the world outside was still. It was the kind of silence that felt safe on the surface but carried hidden tension underneath. She adjusted her grip on the wheel and glanced at the sidewalks. She saw closed shops with their shutters pulled down tight, a stray cat darting across the road, and an old man pushing a shopping cart piled with cans. It was ordinary, all of it. Still, she knew from experience that danger rarely announced itself. It hid in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to step forward. Elena had joined the force because she wanted to help people. She believed in justice, in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Her father had been a cop before her, a man she admired for his courage and patience. When he died in service, she promised herself she would carry on his legacy. Yet, every night she drove alone in her car, she felt the pressure of that promise pressing hard against her chest. She slowed at a corner where the light flickered above a convenience store. For a brief moment, her eyes caught a figure leaning against the wall. A boy in a thin hoodie, his shoulders hunched, his backpack sagging. She noticed him instantly, even though he tried to stay small, unnoticed. Something about him tugged at her heart. He was young, too young to be alone out here at this hour. She wondered if he had somewhere to go, someone waiting for him. She knew the answer already. Her car rolled past and their eyes met for a second. She didn't stare, didn't frown, didn't assume. She just saw him, the way you see another human being when you recognize their struggle without words. She wanted to stop, to ask if he was all right, but the rules were strict. Stopping without cause could raise questions, and she had learned that compassion sometimes clashed with protocol. So, with a heavy heart, she drove on. But she couldn't shake the image of him. His eyes had been sharp, not dull. alert. As if he carried more awareness than most adults. She kept glancing in her rearview mirror, but the boy stayed in the shadows, still watching, still silent. Her radio crackled suddenly, pulling her attention back. Nothing urgent, just routine updates. Still her instincts buzzed. She reached the end of the block and slowed again. The night air seemed colder, the streets quieter. Her gut told her to stay alert. And she was right. Not far ahead, shadows stirred in the corner of an alley. She didn't see them yet, not fully, but the boy had. His eyes, sharper than most, had caught what hers had not. A group of men waited there, hidden from her line of sight. Their whispers were low, their movements deliberate. She was driving straight toward them, unaware that she was about to walk into something dangerous. Inside her car, Elena hummed softly to herself, a nervous habit she had carried since academy days. She reminded herself to stay calm, to keep her senses sharp. She thought of her father's words, never underestimate the quiet streets. They hide the loudest dangers. She believed that, but tonight she had no reason yet to feel alarm. The boy, however, felt it in his bones. From where he stood, he saw the men shift closer to the edge of the alley, their eyes tracking the glow of her headlights. His chest tightened. He didn't know her name, but he knew what was about to happen. And he knew that if he stayed silent, she would walk straight into it. Elena reached for her water bottle, took a quick sip, and adjusted her seatbelt. The night still seemed ordinary to her, but in only moments, it would turn into anything but ordinary. And without realizing it, her life was about to depend on the very boy she had just passed. The boy no one noticed, no one trusted, no one believed. The car rolled closer to the danger. The boy's pulse quickened. The decision formed in his heart before it reached his lips. He could no longer remain just a shadow. The boy pressed his back against the cold wall of the convenience store, his hoodie pulled low over his face. He tried to look like he wasn't paying attention, but every nerve in his body was alert. His eyes followed the patrol car as it rolled down the street, its headlights sweeping across the pavement. The female officer inside looked calm, her focus steady, her world reduced to the dashboard, the wheel, and the road ahead. But the boy could see more than she could. His life on the streets had sharpened him. He had learned to notice the quiet things, shadows that didn't move like they should, footsteps that lingered too long, whispers that carried more intent than casual talk. And now those lessons screamed inside his head. In the alley not far ahead, figures stirred. At first they looked like ordinary men standing around, but the boy's instincts told him otherwise. Their posture was tense, their bodies leaning just enough forward, like predators waiting for prey. He caught the gleam of something in one man's hand, metal, long and thin, reflecting the streetlight for only a second. A crowbar maybe. Another shifted his jacket, and the boy caught the outline of something heavier tucked at his side. His stomach clenched. They weren't just hanging around. They were waiting. Waiting for her. The boy's heart pounded against his ribs. He glanced left then right. The street was quiet, nearly empty. No one else noticed. No one else cared. The people who had hurried past him earlier were long gone. The neighbors inside their homes were behind locked doors. It was just him, the officer driving forward, and the men in the alley waiting for the perfect moment. For a second he thought about walking away. It wasn't his problem. She wasn't family, she wasn't a friend, she didn't even know his name. If something happened to her, the world would go on. And if he got involved, he might end up hurt, or worse. The streets had taught him one rule above all: stay silent, stay safe. But as he looked at her patrol car rolling closer, something burned in his chest. She had seen him before. She hadn't looked at him with the cold eyes most people used. She had looked at him like he mattered, like she noticed he existed. And now, without knowing it, she was heading into danger she couldn't see. The boy swallowed hard, his throat dry. His legs trembled, not from the cold but from the storm raging inside him. Fear screamed at him to turn away. Courage whispered that he couldn't. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on the men in the alley. They whispered to each other, their movements timed, rehearsed. One nodded at another, signaling. Another adjusted his hood, pulling it tighter around his face. The boy realized they were preparing to strike the moment she slowed at the intersection. The scene unfolded in his mind before it even happened. The car stopping, the men rushing out, the officer caught off guard, alone, outnumbered. He could already hear the glass shattering, the shouts, the chaos. His fists clenched at his sides. He couldn't let it happen. But what could he do? He was just a homeless kid with no power, no voice. If he shouted, would she even hear him? If she did, would she believe him? Or would she dismiss his warning as nonsense, the rambling of a street kid no one trusted? Still, something inside him refused to stay still. He knew the truth of what he had seen. He knew the danger was real. And he knew that, for once, silence wasn't an option. The boy's mind raced. He could create a distraction, throw something, make noise, anything to disrupt the men's plan. His survival had always depended on quick thinking, and tonight would be no different. The difference was, this time he wouldn't be saving himself, he would be saving her. The car rolled closer to the alley. The men shifted forward, their bodies tense, ready. The boy's heart hammered so hard he thought it might break through his chest. He took a deep breath, his decision clear. This was the shocking truth the night had revealed to him. Danger was waiting in the shadows, and he was the only one who saw it. No one else would act. No one else could. It was up to him. And so, with fear clawing at his stomach but determination burning in his eyes, he prepared to step out of the shadows. The moment of choice had arrived. Either he would remain the invisible boy the world ignored, or he would become the voice of warning, the hand of courage, the one who changed everything with a single action. The boy's body shook as though the cold had seeped deep into his bones, but he knew it wasn't just the weather. It was the weight of the choice pressing down on him. His eyes darted between the patrol car slowly rolling forward and the dark alley where the men waited like wolves. Every second that passed was one step closer to disaster. He could have turned away. That would have been easy. Survival was about disappearing, staying invisible, keeping your head down. That rule had kept him alive for so long. Nobody on the streets came to save him when he was hungry or when he was cold. Why should he risk himself now for someone who didn't even know his name? But then he thought of her face. The way the female officer had looked at him earlier, not with disgust or pity, but with recognition. Just for a moment she had seen him, not as a problem, not as another forgotten boy, but as a human being. That look had stayed with him, small as it was. Mattered. And now he felt like he owed her more than silence. His chest rose and fell sharply as he gripped the strap of his backpack. Fear whispered in his ear, "You'll get hurt. They're bigger than you. They'll crush you if you get in their way." But another voice pushed back, stronger, steady. "If you do nothing, she won't walk away. You've survived every night on these streets. This time, use that strength for someone else." He crouched slightly, hiding in the shadows, and studied the men again. There were 3 of them, maybe 4. One leaned against the wall, shifting his weight impatiently. Another pulled something out of his pocket. It gleamed faintly in the dim light. The boy's stomach tightened. It wasn't just robbery they had in mind. It was worse. The patrol car slowed at the corner, the officer's eyes scanning but unaware of what waited just ahead. In seconds she would be within their reach. The boy's heart thumped so loudly he was sure they would hear it. His palms grew damp with sweat. He had to act. He had to break the silence. But how? His voice felt small, fragile. Would she even hear him over the hum of the car? Would she trust him if she did? Then an idea struck. He didn't need to shout words. He needed to create noise, loud, startling, disruptive. Something that would shake the men from their timing and force the officer to notice. Slowly he knelt and dug into his backpack. His fingers brushed the few items inside. The old water bottle, a piece of stale bread, and at the very bottom, a small metal can he had picked up days ago. He clutched it now, his hand trembling. The car rolled closer. The men leaned forward. The boy clenched his jaw. This was it. With all the strength in his thin arms, he hurled the can toward the alley. It clattered loudly against the pavement, echoing like a gunshot in the empty street. The men jerked in surprise, their heads whipping around. The officer's eyes snapped toward the sound, her instincts immediately sharpening. The boy didn't stop. He shouted then, his voice cracking but desperate, "Watch out! Ahead! They're waiting for you!" His words pierced the quiet like glass shattering. The men cursed under their breath, realizing their cover was blown. The officer slammed on her brakes, her training kicking in instantly. Her hand went to her radio, her other reaching for her weapon. The trap they had set had been broken in an instant, by the one person they had dismissed as nothing. The boy's chest heaved as he ducked back into the shadows, his heart racing. He had done it. He had made his choice. He had acted. And in that moment he was no longer just a homeless teen blending into the background. He was the difference between life and death. His fear had not disappeared, it still shook him, but courage had pushed him past it. Courage had made him move when silence would have meant tragedy. The officer's headlights now glared directly into the alley, catching the men in their hesitation. They weren't ready for a fight in the open. They had planned on surprise, on weakness. But now, with her alerted and backup being called, the advantage was slipping from their grasp. The boy pressed his back against the wall, gasping for air. He had risked himself, broken every survival rule he had lived by. And yet, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: power. For once, he wasn't invisible. His voice had changed something. His action had mattered. As the men scrambled, as the officer's car doors opened, as the radio crackled urgently for reinforcements, the boy knew the night had shifted. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He had stepped into a moment that would change his life forever. The sound of the can hitting the pavement echoed like thunder through the narrow street. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. The officer's car sat at the intersection, headlights beaming into the dark, while the men in the alley snapped their heads toward the noise, their cover shattered. And in that pause, barely more than a breath, the boy's shout rang out. "Watch out! Ahead! They're waiting for you!" The words cracked through the air like glass, sharp and undeniable. The officer's instincts flared to life. Her training had drilled into her 100 times over: hesitation could cost lives. She braked hard, her hand flying to her holster as her eyes darted to the alley. The men cursed, their plan collapsing in real time. They had wanted silence, surprise, control. Now they had none. One of them pulled a crowbar from his jacket, stepping out of the shadows with anger etched across his face. Another shifted, revealing the outline of a knife glinting in his hand. They had counted on an easy ambush, but now they were exposed. The officer threw open her door, her voice commanding and firm. "Police! Drop it! Hands where I can see them!" Her words carried authority, but she was alone, and they knew it. The boy's chest pounded as he pressed himself against the wall, watching every movement. Fear clawed at him. What if they turned on him for ruining their plan? But his legs refused to run. He couldn't abandon her now, not after breaking the silence. The first man lunged forward, crowbar raised. The officer sidestepped, drawing her baton with practiced speed. She swung hard, the metal cracking against his arm, sending the crowbar clattering to the ground. He howled in pain, stumbling back, but the second man rushed in with the knife. The boy gasped, his fists clenched so tightly his nails bit into his palms. Every part of him screamed to move, to help somehow. He looked around desperately, spotting a loose piece of brick near his feet. Without thinking, he snatched it up, his arm trembling. The officer backpedaled, her eyes locked on the knife. "Drop it now," she shouted, but the man only sneered, circling closer. In that instant, the boy hurled the brick with all the strength in his thin body. It flew through the air and smashed against the ground inches from the attacker's feet. The crack startled him enough for the officer to strike. She swung her baton across his wrist, forcing the knife to clatter to the pavement. The boy's chest heaved as he ducked again into the shadows, unseen but present, his heart racing faster than it ever had before. The officer moved quickly, kicking the knife away as she called into her radio. "Officer needs assistance. Suspects armed, location." Her words cut short as the third man, larger than the others, charged from the alley. His fist swung wide, aiming for her head. She blocked with her arm but stumbled, the weight of his body pressing her toward the wall. For a terrifying moment, the boy thought she would fall. His throat tightened, his stomach dropped. He wanted to scream, but his voice caught in his chest. Then, from deep inside, courage surged again. He grabbed another object from his backpack, a glass bottle he had kept for recycling money, and smashed it loudly against the pavement. The crack rang out sharp and violent, drawing every eye for just a second. It was all she needed. The officer twisted, using her opponent's momentum to throw him hard against the wall. He grunted as the impact knocked the air from his lungs. She stepped back, baton raised, breath heavy but steady. The street filled suddenly with the echo of sirens. Backup was coming fast, the sound growing louder each second. The attackers, now shaken, knew their time was up. One clutched his arm, another scrambled backward, the third cursed as he stumbled to his feet. They fled down the alley, their shadows vanishing into the night. The officer stood tall, her chest rising and falling as she steadied her breath. She bent quickly, grabbing the knife and crowbar as evidence, her eyes still sharp and alert. She had survived. And then she turned her head, scanning the street. Her gaze caught the boy for the first time, not just as a passing figure in the shadows, but as the reason she was still standing. His face was pale, his hoodie damp with sweat, his eyes wide with fear and relief. For a moment, neither spoke. The sirens grew louder, lights flashing at the far end of the street. But in that silence, something powerful passed between them. Gratitude. Recognition. A bond forged in danger. The boy finally stepped forward, his voice low but steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I couldn't stay quiet. They were waiting for you." The officer stared at him, her throat tight. She knew the truth of his words. She also knew that without him, without his noise, his warning, his courage, she might not be alive. "Don't speak," she whispered, echoing the irony of his life, his invisibility. "You spoke when it mattered most." The boy lowered his gaze, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to being thanked. He wasn't used to being seen. The backup cars screeched to a halt, officers pouring out with weapons ready, scanning the street for danger. But the danger had already passed. The night's rescue had already happened, led not by their radios or patrols, but by a homeless teen who had refused to stay silent. The flashing lights of the backup cars painted the street red and blue, washing over walls, windows, and the broken glass that still glittered on the ground. Officers spilled out quickly, their voices sharp, weapons raised as they swept the area. But the fight was already over. The attackers had fled into the night, leaving behind only the crowbar, the knife, and the echo of what might have been. Officer Elena stood in the middle of it all, her baton still in hand, her breath steady but heavy. She felt the sting of bruises beginning to bloom on her arm, the ache in her muscles from the struggle, but more than anything, she felt the weight of what had just happened. She had almost been overpowered. She had almost been caught in their trap. And she knew with absolute certainty that if not for the boy, she might not have walked away. The other officers rushed to her side. "Are you okay? What happened? Where are they?" Questions flew like bullets, fast and demanding. Elena answered as best as she could, pointing to the alley where the suspects had escaped. But her eyes kept drifting to the boy who stood a little apart from the chaos, half hidden in the shadows, his hoodie pulled low, his backpack hanging loose from one shoulder. He looked so small against the noise and flashing lights, but she knew what no one else did. He was the reason she was standing there, alive. One of the senior officers frowned when he noticed him. "Who's that? Did you see something, kid?" His tone carried suspicion, the kind the boy had heard too many times before. The boy's chest tightened. He looked down at his shoes, words stuck in his throat. He had stepped into danger to save someone else, but now, under the glare of uniforms and questions, he felt that old fear return. He was used to being dismissed, used to being treated as nothing more than a problem. Before he could speak, Elena raised her voice. "He's the one who warned me." Her tone was clear, firm, and left no room for doubt. "If not for him, I wouldn't have seen them in time." The officers paused, their eyes shifting to the boy again, this time with something different. Surprise, maybe even respect. The boy shuffled his feet, uncomfortable with the attention. He hadn't done it for praise. He had done it because he couldn't bear to stay silent. Elena stepped closer to him, lowering her baton and softening her voice. "You saved my life tonight. Do you understand that?" The boy swallowed hard. His throat felt dry, but he managed to whisper, I couldn't stay quiet. They were waiting for you." Her eyes softened. She reached out, not to grab him, but to rest a gentle hand on his shoulder. "And because you didn't stay quiet, I'm still here." The boy blinked quickly, his vision blurring with tears he hadn't expected. Nobody had ever said words like that to him before. Nobody had ever told him he mattered. Around them, the other officers gathered evidence, radios crackled with updates, and neighbors peeked nervously through curtains at the flashing lights. But in that small circle between the officer and the boy, the world felt different. Smaller, quieter, more meaningful. Elena straightened and turned to the others. "This kid is a hero." Her words carried authority, and they echoed through the street. Some of the officers nodded. Others glanced at him again, reassessing the figure they had first overlooked. The boy felt heat rise in his chest. Hero. It was a word he had never thought would belong to him. He was used to nuisance, trouble, homeless. But never hero. Still, doubt lingered in him. "I'm nobody," he muttered under his breath. Elena shook her head firmly. "Don't ever say that. You're not nobody. You saved an officer's life tonight. You saved my life. That makes you somebody. Somebody important." The boy's lips trembled as he tried to find words. All his life he had been invisible, overlooked, forgotten. And yet tonight, with nothing but courage and a broken bottle, he had changed everything. The sirens finally died down as the suspects were chased further down the city. The street grew quieter again, though it buzzed with the aftermath. Officers moved around, documenting the scene, but the boy stayed where he was, standing next to Elena, his heart beating slower now, steadier. She leaned down slightly, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" The boy hesitated, then shook his head. Her jaw tightened. "That's going to change." For the first time in years, hope flickered inside him. It was fragile, like a small flame in the wind, but it was there. Someone had seen him. Someone believed him. Someone called him a hero. The aftermath of that night wasn't just about the attackers being stopped. It was about the bond that had been created in the shadows of fear and danger. A homeless boy had spoken when silence was safest, and in doing so, he had rewritten his story and hers. The street eventually calmed. The flashing lights dimmed, the crowd of curious neighbors slipped back into their homes, and the other officers wrapped up their reports. Broken glass was swept aside, evidence bagged, radios quieted. But for the boy, the night would never be forgotten. He had stepped out of the shadows and into a moment that changed everything. Officer Elena remained by his side. She didn't leave him behind or let him fade into the background. Even as other officers came to ask for details, she made sure everyone knew the truth. This boy had been the reason she was still standing. She told them again and again, her voice unwavering, "He saved my life." The boy lowered his gaze each time, embarrassed but also strangely proud. He wasn't used to hearing praise, wasn't used to being acknowledged at all. To him, it felt surreal, as if the night had turned him from invisible to visible in a matter of seconds. When the last of the officers drove away, Elena stayed a little longer. She looked at him, her face soft in the glow of the remaining streetlight. "Do you have a home to go to?" she asked gently. The boy hesitated. He wanted to lie, to say yes, to avoid pity. But her eyes told him the truth mattered. He shook his head slowly. No, not for a long time. Her heart tightened. She saw more clearly now than ever what his life had been. The thin hoodie that barely fought the cold, the tired slump of his shoulders, the way his hands trembled from more than adrenaline. This wasn't just a boy who had been brave tonight. This was a boy who had been surviving every single day with no one to protect him. "You're not going back out here alone," she said firmly. Her voice carried the same authority she used in the field, but now it was filled with compassion. "Not after what you've done. Not after who you've proven yourself to be." The boy's throat tightened. Hope wasn't something he allowed himself to feel often. It hurt too much when it slipped away. But something in her tone told him this wasn't just another kind word destined to fade by morning. This was real. They walked together toward her car, the night air still cool but somehow lighter now. He carried his old backpack, though for the first time, it didn't feel like the weight of his entire world. As they reached the car, he paused, looking back at the street where it had all happened. The alley still sat in shadow, the pavement still scarred by the fight. But instead of fear, he felt pride. That was the place where he had found his courage. That was the place where his silence had ended. In the days that followed, the story spread quickly. Local news stations reported it. Homeless teen saves officer from ambush. Headlines framed him as a hero, not as another forgotten kid on the streets. People who had once passed him without a glance now looked at him differently. For the first time in years, he wasn't invisible. Elena made sure his bravery wasn't just remembered in words. She connected him with community programs, shelters, and mentors. She spoke for him when others might have doubted, telling anyone who would listen that this boy was not just a survivor but a protector, a young man who had risked everything for someone else. At first, the attention overwhelmed him. He wasn't used to kindness, wasn't used to being offered help. He half expected it all to disappear, to wake up one morning and find himself back in the shadows. But each day proved it was real. People reached out, offering clothes, meals, even opportunities. Slowly, he began to believe that maybe this was the start of something new. And yet, through all the noise, he never forgot the truth of that night. It wasn't the praise that mattered. It wasn't the news stories or the headlines. What mattered was the choice he had made. The choice to act when silence was easier, the choice to save someone else when he had every reason to think only of himself. Elena visited him often, checking on him, making sure promises weren't broken. One evening, as they sat on a bench near the station, she looked at him with quiet pride. "You taught me something that night," she said. "That heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they're the ones no one sees, until the moment they refuse to stay silent." The boy felt his chest swell with something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. He wasn't just a shadow anymore. He wasn't just the homeless kid people ignored. He was someone who had changed the course of a night, someone who had given another person a future. And now, for the first time, he felt like he might have one too. The city lights glowed above them, not as cold and distant as before, but warm, alive, almost welcoming. The boy lifted his head, his eyes bright. His story wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about transformation. About how one act of courage could open the door to a new beginning. And though the world still called him the homeless teen who saved an officer, he knew who he really was. A boy who chose to speak when it mattered most. A boy whose silence had ended. A boy whose life had finally begun.